Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mary Baker Eddy Library for this evening's webcast. Tonight's program, a conversation on race, moderated by Professor Charles Ogletree of Harvard Law School, will engage the panelists and you, the audience, in a provocative interchange on the current state of race relations in the United States. The panelists for this evening are Mr. Nathan Rutstein of the Institute for Healing Racism, Ruth Arlene Howe of Boston College Law School, Jeff Stone of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts, Robert Lewis Jr. of the National Conference for Community and Justice, Carol Reinhardt of Community Change Incorporated, and Charles Walker Jr. of the Museum of Afro-American History Board. It's my pleasure to present Professor Charles Ogletree.
Thank you so much. And welcome. Let our panelists be seated. Thank you all for being here for this incredible program at this incredible time. When we think back to 1839, it seems like a long time in history. But it's a day for many of us that marks a point of departure in America's foreign policy, our sense about human rights, personal dignity, and even our court's ultimate judgment about the fact that no one's above the law. In 1839, 53 men and children traveled from West Africa to this land. They were known to be free, proud West Africans with traditions and values, deep faith. And they found themselves in a very awkward position where they were then transferred from the human dignity that was so important a part of their lives to becoming property, captured at sea, to be sold for a few dollars without even the most fundamental rights. What's remarkable about Amistad and the wonderful replicas here in Boston Harbor next to the new federal court is that it's more than just a ship. It's more than just a floating vessel. It should be for you, as it is for me, a reflection on an incredible past and triumph in our political and legal process. And what we hope to do tonight are three things with this panel and with your participation. One is remembrance. We have to remember what happened. We can never let events like this be forgotten. It's as much a part of our history as the American Revolution, as the Civil Rights Movement, as the end of slavery, as the defeat of Jim Crow, or any other fundamental rights that are part of America's history. And the second thing, reflection. That is, what's the significance of this event? We don't just want to remember it for a moment in time, but to reflect upon it. What did it mean? How did it happen? How has it transformed the way we see systems operate? And finally, it's a time for renewal. Renewal. We're here in Boston in the 21st century. This is ground zero in many respects for Amistad. This is where John Quincy Adams, one of our first presidents, as a near-retirement lawyer, represented these proud Africans before our highest court in the Supreme Court. This is the same community where Crispus Attucks, the first person to shed his blood in the American Revolution, right here in Boston. This is a place for the Boston Tea Party where we said, no more. We will not tolerate the sort of colonial rule that will not allow our values of democracy to form. So this is a place that has so much value and so much opportunity and so much history, and we hope that there will be a renewal tonight when we have a conversation on race. It's not just about Amistad. It's not just about African America. It's not just about black and white. It's a very kaleidoscope issues of race, and we hope to explore some of those tonight. And I'm particularly pleased that this important vessel was here. I hope you get a chance to see it tomorrow if you haven't seen it. It really is an amazing thing when you see it not just as a replica of a vessel that transported 53 people from Africa to America, but as a symbol of what happened in the world in the 17th, 18th, and 19th and part of the 20th century, when people, largely from Africa, were treated not as human beings, but as slaves. It's a period that we shall never forget, and hopefully one we will never replicate again. The conversation tonight brings forward a number of people who have taught these top topics, who have thought about them, who are experts on it, and who are very passionate about the issue about race. And so I wanted to start first with Professor Ruth Arlene Howe, professor at Boston College Law School. Professor Howe, you've been teaching a long time. You've had thousands of students. You've written many articles. You've had to confront issues of race. You've remained here in Boston for most of your professional career. When we think about having a conversation on race, what does that mean from you? Parent, teacher, scholar, citizen. What does race mean to you, Professor Howe?
Okay. First of all, it seems to me that race is something that is really not understood. People have been deluded into thinking as though it was something innate and fixed, and do not realize that it is only a social construct, a very recent construct that really came into being at the time that Europeans first arrived here on this continent and took it away from the Native Americans. And in my view, a lot of it has to stem from that feeling as though there had to be some justification for the rape of Africa, the imprisoning and the institution of slavery, which was really the thing that created the Industrial Revolution and the expansion of the West. They had to justify it. So therefore, they developed this hierarchical schism where something that was black was on the bottom and something that was white was on the top. And that superiority justified then the subjugation. But what we are wrestling with today, it's very sad, it seems to me, because there has been so much institutionalization of this idea of something being fixed, something being superior, something being inferior, that how do we break out of it? It seems to me we need a new paradigm, one that is going to truly recognize that we all come from the primates, we all come out of the same origination, and therefore we need to find a way in which we can truly appreciate all of the richness and the difference without this hierarchical ranking, and we have to believe in the capacity of everyone to be developed and to contribute. Now, ultimately, it seems to me we really have to wrestle with what do we do with capitalism, and what do we do with the commitment to that capitalistic value system that really wants to use up people and throw them out and discard them for the benefit of the very few.
Mr. Woodside, let me ask you this. That's part of what you do, trying to think about getting beyond black and white, getting beyond the burdens, the distinctions between people. Tell this audience about your work and why it's so important to think about the broader context of race and trying to get beyond racial division to racial unity, and why that's important to you.
First, I'd like to point out that I'm very hopeful and optimistic about the future in terms of developing racial harmony in this country and elsewhere. I feel that there is a cure for what we call racism today. And it may seem rather simple-minded, but it's not very easily executed. It is the principle of the oneness of humankind. The great majority of people on our planet are not aware that they're all related to each other. Modern science now recognizes that everyone on the planet is at least a 50th cousin. So you're sitting next to a cousin. From a spiritual standpoint, we're closer than cousins. We're brothers and sisters. Because, as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin pointed out, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. Therefore, you are a soul with a body, and not a body with a soul. You don't have a soul. You have a body. You have a body because you are a soul. And a soul is a spiritual emanation of our Creator. That means that all 6 billion human souls are connected to our Creator, just as a ray is connected to the sun. That makes us all children of God. Sadly, that term, even in our houses of worship, has become a very anemic cliche, a holy platitude. But you're sitting next to your brother and your sisters. That is a reality. And our schools should be teaching the principle of the oneness of humankind. Sadly, our schools are doing the very opposite. They're promoting the 4 races concept, promoting diversity, which is good, but diversity that doesn't stem from oneness can create a sophisticated form of apartheid. And you go into any college cafeteria or school cafeteria, you'll see the African-American kids here, the kids of European descent over there, the Hispanics over there. No true interaction between each other. They're really brothers and sisters, but there's no true interaction between each other. And these cliques become breeding grounds for prejudice, animosity, hatred. Our schools must be teaching the oneness of humankind. And I view humanity like a majestic tree. And the twigs and the branches of the tree are the subcultures and cultures. There is no such thing as a black race or a white race or a yellow race or a red race. There's only one race, the human race. And the twigs and the branches have their own particular individuality. There are no 2 twigs or branches that are exactly alike, but the twigs and the branches are attached to the tree. They're a part of the tree. So the different cultures and subcultures are an outgrowth of oneness. And I feel that if a person truly understands, A, what a human being really is, and B, understands the realities underlying the principle of the oneness of humankind, that person could never be a racist. Never. Because that person, when he looks into the eyes of another human being, regardless of color of skin or education or career that the person pursues, you will be looking into the eyes of your brother and your sister.
Thank you very much. Carol Reinhardt and Jeff Stone, let me ask both of you, part of this issue in having a conversation on race is about changing the dialogue, changing the paradigm. Carol, how do we do that? And can we do that?
Yes, we can do that. How we do it is a great challenge, I believe. I think part of the challenge is sitting in the fire. I'm reminded of that title of a book by a man named Arnold Mindell, who proposes that if we wish to put fires out, we need to learn how to sit in them. And that there's an essential requirement, I think, in facing the realities of our collective history at this point in our time of being able to, as nearly as possible, speak honestly and regretfully about the reality that we share, and to be able to go through the work of holding how hard that is, and to really be present to that. So certainly being present is a piece of changing the paradigm, because so much of what is a tempting opportunity for those of us who enjoy the dubious privilege of white privilege is that we can stay out of the fire. We can step aside.
You say that, you just let that slip by, white privilege. That may be your point of view. What do you mean by white privilege? Because a lot of white people don't think they are privileged. They're poor. They didn't get in here. They didn't get the job. What do you mean by white privilege? Is it a privilege for a unique group, or are you saying whiteness has a privilege to it?
My experience, my observation, what I hear and see is that someone who is seen as white is treated in a different way. That's a privilege. The assumption of the benefit of the doubt, the assumption of certain kinds of positions, opportunities that are granted so that the questions are asked later, not first. And the assumptions are made later, not first. That's a dubious privilege when you stop and think about it, but it certainly makes life a lot more comfortable and easy. That's not to say that people who happen to be observably white don't experience tremendous pain, and that economic injustice can hit those lives very hard, and people can be great victims of injustice. But there is, in this culture, such race consciousness, even when it's unconscious, that there is an element of experience of that's different for people who are observedly white.
Let me ask you, Jeff Stone, you too, like Carol Reinhardt and others, have been trying to think about changing attitudes, changing hearts, door by door, neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community. Why are you doing that? And do you think that you can really imagine having a conversation about race and engaging people of different ethnicities and different races to truly have a dialogue as opposed to a monologue? That is, to both talk and listen as opposed to simply talk.
Well, one of the elements underlying what everybody's talking about is the isolation of people of different racial and ethnic groups from each other. We walk by each other, we're in this room together, but most people have never really had a dialogue or a close conversation focused on the issue of our ethnic and racial diversity, an intentional conversation. Everybody talks about it, but nobody really talks about it in depth. And that's why a project like the Amistad Neighborhood Conversations on Race and the new citywide dialogues on Boston's ethnic and racial diversity that the Urban League is implementing with dozens of other community organizations starting next month are so important. These are providing vehicles for people, perhaps for the first time, to experience the feelings, thoughts, and experiences directly of people, face-to-face, people of other ethnic and racial groups. There's no substitute for that. Most of us, maybe in this room, it might be a different group that have done that kind of work, but most people in general have not done that kind of work. When you do that, stereotypes are reduced, comfort level, familiarity, and empathy for each other goes up. I should also mention that you'll be speaking with Robert Lewis, but the National Conference for Community and Justice has for years done wonderful dialogues that have made a difference in people's attitudes.
Let me ask you about that, Jeff, because you make an important point, but you also pose a challenge that we'll have to grapple with tonight. I remember President Clinton in the early 90s talked about, as a Southerner, as a native of Arkansas, as someone who had witnessed segregation in his own state, Central High, where blacks were stopped from going there. The governor stopped that he wanted to have a conversation on race, as you propose here in Boston. It's a grand idea in theory. But you come to my neighborhood and we have a conversation. Said, oh, let's talk about race. I'm from Roxbury, and when I walk down the street in Boston trying to get a cab home, they drive right past me. When I try to get on the T, they look at me as if I'm a criminal and I work hard every day. I go down to a place that has a basement that sells things very cheap, and they follow me around in the department store. I try to jog in the park, and when I'm running, they think I'm running from something. So I've had this conversation with you, and I've opened my heart. I've revealed my wounds. Who was there to treat me after I've been honest and candid about my experiences as a person in this community?
Well, in terms of the dialogue, this is 4 sessions with 2 trained facilitators who have diversity within them. One facilitator will be a person of color, most likely, and one will be maybe 2 persons of color. So there'll be empathy and understanding among the facilitators who are guiding the dialogue. White people need to hear what you just said, and they need to hear it in more than a 15-minute conversation. And the beautiful part of both these efforts, the Amistad conversations and the citywide dialogues, is that they are multi-session efforts. So people are going to be coming back, sitting with the same group a second time, a third time, a fourth time, perhaps a fifth time. That is qualitatively different than just a single session forum. You begin to, your first impressions of some people and their impressions of you may be very different than they wind up being at the end of those 4 sessions. It's not necessarily a panacea, certainly, to do these dialogues. It's not going to be the answer to systemic racism in our society. But the alternative of doing nothing is just not an alternative at all.
Robert Lewis, let me ask you, because you have been out there talking to the young people, and they are the conscious of the community in the sense that whatever we tell them, I mean, we can give all sorts of lectures and all sorts of information, but they make up their own mind, and they also model behavior of adults. And most of us are twice the age of the young people that you're talking to, and so we're already irrelevant to them. What are they saying to you when you talk about having a conversation on race? If I'm 15 or 13 or 18 here in the state of Massachusetts, what are you hearing from the young people?
You're hearing a bunch of things. One of the first things you're hearing from them is, once we get the conversation up, step out the room and let us have the dialogue.
Great.
Which is important. The things that I'm finding out, in particular with the young people we're working with, is that the young people want to be side by side. They want to deal with breaking down their own biases. They want to deal with the issues that they're addressing. We're hearing from young people is that they want to go back into their schools and communities to make a difference. We had the conversation last week at the Children's Museum. There were about 125 young people from 30 different cities and towns around the state. And all of those sessions were facilitated by young people who were trained, who wanted to take this vehicle not just to do the conversation, which is interesting, because they were telling us, this is just the start of what we need to do when we leave here. The young people, they want to be side by side and meeting with folks from across the state, and in particular, a lot of folks really want to be side by side and listening to what some of the young people, in particular in Boston, are dealing with. Young people turned around and were saying, we should be having these dialogues in our schools. We should be having these dialogues in our communities. But if you were at the dialogue, they were saying, we must have these dialogues in our schools, in our communities. And what's happening with this is that now they're working on a strategy to ensure that it becomes a vehicle for all high school students to participate. One piece that came out of this dialogue last week off of your question was that about 25 parents showed up. And the 25 parents decided that we'd like to be there to listen to what the young people are saying. So that was interesting, and they wanted to listen. So we turned around and said, instead of listening, we'd like to put you in a room, and we had a young person facilitate that dialogue. Mm-hmm. The interesting that came, I'll say this too, because it's so easy sometimes for us to say what we want our young people to do, but how hard it was for folks to initiate that conversation, because it actually put them out front, and that they were going to have to address their own issues that came from that. And again, as the young people were leaving, it was interesting to hear them saying, Mommy and Daddy, we may need to start at home first. And I guess the thing that I would say, as you were asking earlier, I don't know if it's one of these conversations that we need to think about. It's a conversation we must have. And we here, if we're saying Boston is to be great in the 21st century, once in a while what we have to do is like really address our fears. And this is one of the fears that we need to overcome.
Great. Thank you very much. Judge Walker, let me ask you this. You now sit as a judge on the Industrial Accidents Board, so you see people coming through, looking to the legal system to have their injuries addressed, but you spent many years as the executive director of the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. And this is in the 21st century. And you saw an increase in the number of people coming, not a decrease, with problems about discrimination, whether it's gender, whether it's sexual orientation, whether it's race, whether it's age, whether it's disability. We seem to be going in the wrong direction in terms of solving the problem of dialogue in our problems. It seemed to increase. And you also, like many others, heard the comments on the local radio station that incensed an entire community when children were the target of a poorly crafted series of jokes. So I ask you, can we have this conversation? Can we really have an honest conversation about race and address the problems that you witnessed in your lifetime?
That's the answer I don't have. I think that's a question that everyone has to answer themselves. Yes, there was an increase, 5,000 cases a year, the MCAD, and 90, close to over half of them are dismissed, and then you have people appealing. But I always tend to put a positive glow on that, and it's kind of like reflective of the Amistad. You know, you look at the Mindi, the African people that from West Africa, they revolted on the boat, but once they got to the United States, they put their faith in justice, in our justice system, not knowing anything about our culture, our language, but they had a good sense of justice and what was fair. And so the people that come to the MCAD, they have a sense that they're going to get some justice. So the exponential rise maybe also be the exponential rise in the confidence that we have a way of healing the land. And so I take that from the Amistad example. Can we have an honest conversation? Some people are saying that they're just talked out. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. It's funny. I spent some time this afternoon with my daughter. We grew up in a she was growing up in a suburb, and she's looking at colleges. And we work at a all-black college. She's never had that exposure before, but she went there. And when the recruiter the admissions officer was talking about the school, she raised her hand. She says, "I really do want to look at this school because I'm tired of being just isolated. I'm tired of being singled out. I'm tired of just being alone and not having something in common with people." These are people she went to elementary school with, and now she's graduating, and she's saying she has nothing in common with them. And it really hurt me a little bit, but it also inspired me that she really wants to really go back to her roots. But are we ready to have? I think so. I hope so. I hope so. Tree, I call you, I'm sorry, Professor Ogletree.
You can call me Tree. You've called me worse.
But you are a Tree. He and I hail from California. And I don't know why you came here, but I know I came here because I saw Boston as the beacon of hope. I worked on Bobby Kennedy's campaign. I was in 4th grade. I shook John F. Kennedy's hand. I read about this Cradle of Liberty stuff. And, I remember when George Wallace campaigned in my little Ventura County, California. And I remember my high school students, we gave him the biggest standing ovation. Not because we appreciated him, but we shouted him off the stage and out of the school. And the parents were so upset. And we just were so excited that we done something positive. And I said, that's where that comes out of Boston, Massachusetts. That kind of resistance and suddenly I get here and I see Boston in 1975. You know, I'm running for cover, you know. I couldn't even go to Baskin Robbins, you know, without being careful. I was saying, I come in peace, I come in peace. Mel King, who's here, knows. 75, the riot on Carson Beach. I mean, to be told to go to school with people who don't look like you, and to resist it, and have parents hold children in school buses for 4 hours, was just an unbelievable thing. So are we ready to answer? Are we ready to answer that question and have a conversation? I just hope so.
Thank you very much, Judge Walker. Let me follow it up now. I've asked the scripted questions. Now I get to ask my questions. Here we are, and I think it's remarkable that we have some very positive, uplifting, aspirational views about the future. And yet, in order to get to the future, it's important that we get through the present and reflect on the past. We can't forget from whence we came. And we know a community that has had a complicated history. Of course, John Quincy Adams. Of course, the Boston Tea Party. Of course, the wonderful tributes of Crispus Attucks. Of course, the great abolitionist movement in the state of Massachusetts. A remarkable history. But as Judge Walker just mentioned, this is where, 21 years after Brown was decided, there was resistance to children going into the public schools, violent resistance. This is the place, 24 years after Brown was decided, brother that we all know, worked for the city, dressed in a three-piece suit, right in front of City Hall, Ted Landsmark, was struck by a flagpole. This is a place that Willie Bennett, who can't deny that he's had problems in the past, but was a victim of a racial hoax, claiming that he was responsible for tragic murder of a woman and her fetus, when in fact he had absolutely nothing to do with it, and a community bought into that racial hoax. So some people say, I'm not sure that this is the place where we can really have a conversation. This is the place that Chuck mentioned, where we thought in the 1970s there was this rising candidate for citywide office who had this rainbow coalition. The people you're talking about, everyone you've described today are the people who supported this guy named Mel King. They're the obvious candidate to become mayor. It didn't happen. That says something about Boston. And when we talk to young people, how do we overcome that image of the city? The 6 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news, if there's any, I can predict this. If there's any coverage of crime tonight on the 11 o'clock news, the face is likely to be black or brown. How do we change that? I'm not just any person, but to the panel. How do we truly address not the symptoms, but the causes of problems here? Nathan and Jeff?
I feel prejudice is an emotional commitment to ignorance. We're not only ignorant of the reality of the oneness of humankind, but I believe we're ignorant of the nature of racism. We're dealing with pathology. Racism is so deeply ingrained in the American psyche that it has developed into a disease, certainly not a viral or bacterial disorder, an organic defect, but a psychological, emotional, and spiritual disorder. And all of us are affected by it. All of us. Because racism is a part of our culture. It's a part of our collective consciousness. There are well-meaning white folks who intellectually believe that we're all equal. But deep down, they harbor feelings of superiority. And those who are most sensitive go into denial, which is a carefully concealed mental maneuver that springs from a sense of shame. And we at the Institute for the Healing of Racism feel that whites in the main suffer from obsessive compulsive disorder in terms of race. What is an obsession but an irrational fixed idea or set of feelings? And this feeling of superiority is fixed within the hearts of whites, which sets off certain set feelings. And this obsession is often carried out in a compulsive manner. For example, a white person driving through a black neighborhood, without thinking, rolls up the windows, locks the doors. This is a pathology. It has to be treated as such. And people of color, they suffer from this disease in the form of internalized racism, which thwarts their development as human beings. It is a real, real problem. And post-traumatic stress disorder. We are all ill because of racism. And we need a mechanism whereby the participants become involved in a process of transformation, where you discover your true racial condition and you break out of denial, and you're in a safe, non-threatening atmosphere, and you begin a healing process. And while you're healing what you've discovered within yourself, you're replacing it with a genuine belief in the oneness of the humankind. And we have developed these institutes, and we have experienced transformation in people.
Let me challenge you on that. I want you've described me, I'm Joe from Hyde Park, I'm white. You've said I have an excessive compulsive disorder.
Obsessive.
I think I'm very rational. Now, let's have this dialogue. Let me tell you my concerns. I grew up here, and I've worked very hard. I took a test to become a member of the fire department in my community, and I scored higher than those black testers. I didn't get a job. They got the job. It seems very rational to me. I did a good job, and I was denied opportunity. I send my child to the public school, and they have these scholarships. It's the Martin Luther King Scholarship. It's the United Negro College Scholarship. It's the Thurgood Marshall Scholarship. There's no scholarship for Irish kids from my background based on having grown up here in Boston. I try to go into the community and drive through, and people assume that I'm a police officer or a social worker. I'm just going home. There are stereotypes about me because of the color of my skin. So I'm obsessive, I'm compulsive. Talk to me.
Yes. You're not a bigot. You mean well. But when you were born in this society and took your first breath, figuratively speaking, you inhaled the virus of race, of superiority. It's not something conscious with a person of goodwill, but it is a part of you.
Wait, you're saying I was born superior simply because of the pigmentation of my skin. I'm white, so I'm racist.
I wouldn't use the term racist. I would say that you have an attitude of white supremacy. You feel superior.
You know, last time I heard that, they were talking about the Ku Klux Klan. I'm not a member of the Klan. They were talking about these folks who are lynching and killing blacks. I have no animosity toward black people at all. And I'm worried that when we try to have a conversation, you are stymieing that conversation by labeling me without even knowing me or my heart. How do you reach me? I'm just a hardworking, dedicated father who wants the same thing. I want fairness and a level playing field for my child. Anyone can help me? I'm trying to be very rational. Can any of you help me? Jeff?
I'm a Boston native, and I'm sick and tired of Boston being labeled around the country as a racist city. I'm very tired of that. And I'd like to, by the way, I want to observe that this is one of the most beautiful audiences I have seen in a long, long time, perhaps ever. I hope everybody has looked at the faces and the diversity of the faces in this audience. This is what you don't see in Boston very often, by the way.
Right.
We not only have physical segregation, we also have a kind of psychological segregation in the city. So you go to certain things where you see mostly white folks and other things where you see people of color very often. And it's very disheartening if you're aware of that. This is a beautiful audience, and I hope we have more audiences like this. But I'd like to ask, is there anybody else? Please raise your hand if you're sick and tired of Boston being labeled as a racist city, black or white, or whatever. There are a few. Now, we can't just, it's true. We can't just say, Boston, we can't just magically say, oh, it's 2003 and we're all better. There's no shortcuts to dealing with this on an interpersonal level. Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. All better interracial relations is local. And what I mean by that is, I believe, and I think a number of people here believe, there's no substitute for personally engaging each other on this issue. Exactly how you do it, we have different models, but there's just no substitute for personally getting involved. Yes, we can do something, Charles. I really believe we can do something. Well, and if we want, whether we're a person of color or white, whatever ethnic background we are, if we are tired of being known for 30 years or more as a racist city, we have it within our power to proactively do something about it by getting together and engaging each other and talking about our past, acknowledging it, our present, and where we want to go from here. Honestly. The hard stuff, respectfully, but honestly.
Let me raise another question. I want to come to the audience in a few minutes. I want you to know that in about 15 minutes. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk to audience members in the middle of this aisle. In the middle of this aisle, you have to line up, so start thinking if you want to have a question, and right here in the back so that I don't have to get into the crowd. But I'll take questions in each of the different aisles. Let me raise a slightly different question, because we've sort of painted the demon, and the demon seems to have white skin. Let me paint the demon a little bit differently, if it is a demon. We talk about the disintegration of the city and with the images of white flight. There are a lot of people who are black and brown who packed up and headed for the hills. They didn't trust the public school system. They didn't want to pay the high property taxes. They were concerned about crime. They wanted to give their children a better start in life. Is that part of the problem as well? Is there a message to the black leaders in the community who come here to get votes and come here to have a meal and come here for social events, but don't see it as in their best interest to live in the very city that they complain about is not open and progressive and concerned? What about black middle-class flight? Professor Howe?
Well, I didn't participate in that, or at least I didn't get any further than Brookline. And I guess my comments are not directly in response to the question that you have raised. I'd like to go back and underscore and respond to something that had been said earlier. Yes, I think we all do suffer from some psychological illness, but it is a situation that I do not believe can be rectified by our own individual actions, even if we are engaging in serious, honest, open dialogue. My view is it's time, and we are critically at a crossroads. We have to do something about changing our government. And that goes back. We've got two challenges. One is the upcoming city election in Boston, and a year from now, the national election. And we've got the opportunity to make significant change, but you've got to get people registered, and they've got to get to the voting booth.
Personal responsibility.
That's it.
Robert Lewis?
There's a couple of things off the questions, and as you were reflecting back into the 70s, And as I was sitting here, a couple of things that I was reflecting on. I was at East Boston High in 1978 when busing occurred. You know, and at the end of the day, if anyone wants to take a look, I can show you. I can remember in 1976 having dinner at a friend's house on a Wednesday night, and that same person on a Thursday night throwing a Molotov cocktail bomb through my window. My family was the first black family in the Maverick Street housing projects. And I know this, and I experienced this. Boston is 24/7. You have to be part of it 24/7. It's not 9 to 5. It isn't just I sponsor and support this initiative and I can hide behind it and then come out between 9 and 5. You know, Boston's 24/7, and what our young people, as well as community residents, need to see is this becoming part of the norm. We said earlier about Mel, and I always tell folks I'm a Mel kid, and I'm proud of that. But there's something wrong with that we're still reflecting about Mel. Mm-hmm. We're reflecting about Mel. Why aren't there 50 Mels? Why aren't we saying that there's an opportunity for our young people to participate in the political process, and we're not going to tear them down based on addresses, based on all of those other things? And we have this fundamental responsibility to reinvest back in Boston and not to be afraid to leave. And as I tell my kids who attend Boston Public Schools, I ain't going no place. Because that Boston's 24/7, because if we all leave, then as what Jeff says, this room will look a lot different in the next 15 to 20 years. So we do have this fundamental responsibility. And something I've always said is that the day we get big business where those folks are actually living in our neighborhoods as well, our schools will be different. Mm-hmm. You know, violence and crime will be down. This is a little bit different when we walk out the door and say, hello, neighbor, and not hello, 9 to 5. So, again, Boston needs to be 24/7, and I think it's an opportunity to start now.
Judge Walker, and then Carol Reinhardt.
Okay. We did move. We didn't. We're not from Boston, but my wife's from Jersey City. Grew up in a tenement, 13 kids, and she was pregnant at the time, and I said, honey, let's now get a house in a 2-family in Dorchester. And she said, honey, listen, and she's 9 months pregnant. Says, it's no great shakes having to put our children at risk. I grew up, in a ghetto with 12 other siblings. We can change the world, but we don't have to change it at the risk and the safety of our children. And we went to the suburbs, and I'm not ashamed of it. We went to the suburbs because there was a better opportunity, better education. We're like every red-blooded American in this country that wants good value for their house, they want a little land, and they want a good education for their children. And so, and in that community, it has racism and anti-Semitism, and we're dealing with that on the local level with these conversations, and we're meeting constantly. And I feel really, really good about that decision. Unfortunately, and I hope the African Americans don't jump on me about this, but the price to pay is what I face today with my daughter saying, "Hey, I'm isolated, and I really can't relate. I really can't relate to all my classmates who I've been in kindergarten with." So I feel like I failed. I feel like I failed, despite giving her our roof, giving her security, giving her, some safety in the sense of a good education, and she had a great education. She's in AP classes, but suddenly she's lost something. And so I don't know the real answer, but I know I don't feel guilty for that decision. And in broaching that, so I think we have another opportunity. My wife always says, and let me tell you what a Thurgood Marshall quote I said instead. He said something that was very interesting. I read it last night. He said, "I read the sports pages to hear of man's triumphs, and the front pages to read of man's disasters." And I think the fact that we cannot grope with, we have not grappled with the 2003 race issue is really one of those, the biggest disasters, and I just don't have a quick answer for it.
Okay. Carol Reinhardt.
Well, I was reminded of something I heard Felix Arroyo say at one point a few years ago. Someone who represents the first Latino to be elected in this city, who's got an uphill battle to stay in his place. He was part of just coming off the Boston School Committee when he made the remark that he thought that if we defined our school system as metropolitan, greater Boston, instead of the city of Boston, we would have a very different investment in our schools. And as I think about it, I'm going to make a guess here, an educated guess, that in this room, in addition to people who are residents of Boston, there are plenty of people who are residents of suburbs of Boston as well. I am. And I used to say defensively that I married into Belmont. But it's had the pluses and the minuses. A kid raised there who's got limitations because of how she sees the world. And yet, a town that's really committed with its Belmont Against Racism, the work that's being done there. And I think it's really important for us to understand that, yes, Boston is racist. Greater Boston is racist. And what we are is Greater Boston. And the work that we need to do is in that larger context. And you know what? We can hold that biggest circle. We could really grow that way and to deepen the connections between the urban and suburban links that exist, and to not waste our time blaming each other for choices made. They're all bad choices if there's poor choices.
Yeah. Let's be clear here. Boston doesn't have the quarter of the market on racism here. Racism is sprinkled everywhere. And I would just tell you one quick. I remember why I missed the train and I had to walk from Canton to my town, Sharon. And we had just moved into town, and I remember it was like a 2.5-hour walk. And I was really tired, and I remember seeing someone drove by and said nigger, and I was getting really scared, and I saw the trees blowing, and I was thinking of the poplar trees and strange fruit. And you laugh. And I wrote notes on the telephone poles on the way, and I said, "My name is Chuck Walker. If you find my body," it's what goes through your mind, when you're in a new town. And I remember a cop finally pulled over, and I was really happy to see him. And he asked for identification and everything else, gave me a ride home, and I remember 4 months later, I got a call from someone that says, "Did you ever get home? Did you ever get home safely?" All that to say is that I really felt I never felt threatened in my life because of my race, but just walking through there and having that one call, seeing the trees blowing, the images were just too profound. So I'm just saying, Boston, you don't have the corner of the market. It's universal, and we all have to deal with this problem.
Let me go back to Nathan, then we're going to go to our respondents, Bill Smith and our student, and then we're going to turn to the audience. So if you have a question or a comment, let me at least advise you that I will hold the mic. So you have the next 5 minutes to think about your question, so it's both brilliant and brief, with the emphasis on the brief. I'm going to start in that aisle over there, so if anyone wants to answer questions, you go there. I'm going to come here. Don't get in front of the camera. Get somewhere near this pillar. And I'm going to come over here to this aisle as well. So I'm going to go left, center, and then right. So, Nathan?
Yes. We're all aware of the fact that there have been some wonderful legislation passed in the area of civil rights. Racial segregation, for the most part, doesn't exist in the United States of America. But in integrated lines, there are people of all ethnic groups. They're together, all seeking some water from a fountain. But while this line is integrated, people on that line are harboring feelings of inferiority and superiority and hatred and anger and fear. And that's what we want to get to. And I'd like to just share personal experience to illustrate how deeply entrenched this feeling of superiority is in the white person. It's a personal story. When I was in my mid-20s, I was driving a car down the road, and the fellow in front of me was just creeping along. And I was infuriated because I wanted to be on time for my appointment. And I was blowing the horn angrily and tailgating the guy. And the guy finally turned around. And it was a black man. And the words "move nigger" flashed through my mind. Well, that word, the N-word, had never passed my lips. I was brought up in a very liberal home. And I was horrified that I could think that way. And then the anger in my heart toward this man I didn't know evolved into hatred. I had no control over those emotions. I was horrified. And then I felt sorry for myself, and I said, I didn't choose to feel this way. I didn't choose to think this way. Where did it come from? And then Mr. Nadile came to my rescue and started to whisper in my ear all the wonderful things I had been doing in the field of human rights. And I came to the conclusion that what I had experienced was an aberration. It would never happen again. But I became very skillful in suppressing this feeling of superiority whenever it would raise up out of my unconscious. And I would do this with a smile on my face because I didn't want anyone to know how I really felt. I want everyone to know that I was progressive and liberal.
Let me go to Bill Smith and Hygo, our student. Get both of you to come up here and sort of give your reactions and responses. You've heard of this. You've all been in dialogues about this. Bill, tell this audience your sense of these issues and how we confront them. Turn around.
Thank you. I'm an optimist. And I believe that if we believe that things can change, and we won't be saying 20 years from now that Boston is the most racist city in America. But I believe that based on two reasons. I believe deeply in personal redemption. And I think that has to be a part of what everyone here has as a part of their thought as they leave here. Because we will never see progress. We will never see progress if we continue to put one another in a box of any definition and say that it is not possible for this to happen because those people are that way and they all do this, whichever side or perspective it's coming from. And it shouldn't be a surprise that I would think that because we have two marvelous examples, John Newton and Malcolm X. At points in those two people's lives, you wouldn't have given a plug penny, not a nickel. You wouldn't have given a plug penny that they would make any contribution to the progress of the unity of the human race. You know the story of John Newton, Amazing Grace, the slave trader, ferried past so many trips of human cargo. The most despicable among human beings if we think of him. And this man, through his personal redemption in his heart, changed the system of slavery and had it abolished in England some 60 years prior to this country. Transformation and change in a person that you wouldn't give a nickel from. So don't write that white guy off who's in South Boston, who you think is just against you because he doesn't know any better. Malcolm X, we know his story. We know his story. And Malcolm's life, in my estimation, went because he believed and understood the principle of the oneness of the human family. He transformed. So don't write that brother off who's on the corner, because he will change, he can change. But the most important thing is we need to look in ourselves, each of us. Don't look out there at the other guy. Don't talk about what somebody else's philosophy is. Talk about yourself. What can I do? What can I earn? Have a conversation with yourself. Talk to your own heart, no matter how far down the line you think you are. And lastly, as I pass the mic over to this young brother here, and I just have to say a word about him. Because while other kids are out partying tonight and on Saturday nights and planning what they're going to do with whatever, this young guy has, for years, not months, been dedicating his efforts to promoting racial understanding on college campuses. And it came about and I have to tell this because the youth are our future. They are our future. You can hear all the diverse opinions here. We're out of here. 20 years, most of you are out of here. Okay. And it's young people like Hygo and the other faces I see in the audience, as young as little Alex there. You are the people who will make the change. And this young guy, atypical. You're from Ridgewood, New Jersey. Suburban town in New Jersey, some integration, but all on the upper end, the very upper end. And he was at Skidmore College, happened to come across this neighborhood dialogues on race book and say, wow, this is really interesting. What can I do with this to work with other students? And it grew from one thing to another. They formed conversations. They were able to facilitate the humanities department to give credit for the course on campus, and it grew where there were not just 5 students, but 50 students talking about race and more. Transferred to the University of Rochester because Skidmore didn't have his medical, pre-med specialty, it's a liberal arts school. And we tapped this guy, we said, hey, Hygo, we want to see if you can help us get some things going in Boston. He's been over here this is his second weekend, meeting with students at BU, Harvard, BC, New England Conservatory, Lesley College, Emerson College, talking about how to develop conversations on race. So this is our future. I'm going to pass you over to Hygo.
I really don't know what to say, but really, I guess I have to agree with the idea that it's very important to support and encourage young people in their efforts in the realization of the oneness of humanity. In 20 years, most of you guys are not going to be able to make a significant difference in this area, and it's going to be us living our lives, going to work, doing all these things. I'm not going to be able to live in the world I want to live in unless this ideal of the oneness of humanity is realized. So, yeah, it's really, I think that I think that work with young people is of the utmost importance. I think it's definitely in college, in the work that I've done, it's an age when people are trying to figure out how they're going to be adults, how they're going to live their lives, but they're also dealing with how they're going to make their parents happy, if their parents are going to be okay with them marrying outside of their race, doing all these things. I think there's so much opportunity in young people, and I just see it as like I want to convince all my friends that they have the opportunity to make a serious change. So, yeah, all young people, seriously, you have the power, you could do this. It's really just a big thing is exemplifying what you want to see happen in the world in yourself. It's very frustrating to see the world around you and see the adults having a lot of difficulty figuring out solutions to all the problems that they tell you you're going to face. But one thing that you can do is to just have interracial relationships, have friends from other backgrounds, do all the things that you think are important that are going to make the world the way you want it to be. So, young people, I love you all. And older people, please support the young people. It's very important. So, yes, thank you all.
Thank you, Bill and Heigo. I must confess that it's a little disconcerting to realize that my best years are behind me. But I've heard it twice, so it must be so. Well, while I have a few minutes left in this life, questions here in this audience. Come on up. Question or comment? Give us your name and comment.
Yeah. I'm John Kano from West Africa, Sierra Leone. I'm actually very much thrilled about this meeting here tonight. And I come from a country where perhaps the leader of the Amistad revolt, that's Joseph Sink or Sengbe Pierre comes from, that is Sierra Leone. And we in Africa definitely also felt and still continue to feel the pinch of racism. You must be aware of the fact that at a point in time, I think in 1884, the European powers then met and divided the whole of the African country like a piece of cake. And the country from which I come from, I think, is far less than the size of Massachusetts, if I'm not mistaken. And the point here is, one of the panelists out there did mention a very important fact that creates an indelible print on my mind. And that is the fact that racism is a psychological disease, is a psychological issue. Now, psychological issues is a psychological issue on both parties. That is, those that actually feel superior, that's the superiority complex, and those that also feel inferior, that's the inferiority complex. Now, it is actually true that blacks or other minority races also feel inferior psychologically. And whites, a lot of whites also feel superior psychologically. Now, the point here is I don't actually want this to be just an intellectual discourse without having an impact on reality. How do we here feel that we can actually heal this psychological problem of either inferiority complex or superiority complex? Thank you.
Anybody want to give a quick response to that? Quick 30-second response. Another question here. Let me just warn everybody. Let me apologize in advance. I will not get all of your questions and comments. Just won't happen. We're going to take two here, two in the center, two, and I'm going to come back and forth. So get in line in one of those three places, and if you're well in the back line, you won't be heard tonight. Nathan, you want to give a quick response?
Yes, and setting up a mechanism where people of all backgrounds can come together in a safe and non-threatening atmosphere where three things happen. The participants are able to gain an understanding of their true racial conditioning, and they're exposed to a means of healing, which we call the dialogue of the spirit, where people learn how to listen with the heart and reach each other's hearts. And third, where people are able to understand and internalize the principle of the oneness of humankind and undergo transformation.
Okay.
Sure. My question is, it's great that we're all here, but it seems like we're all of the same mind. You're sort of preaching to the choir. How do we, and I guess it was Mr. Stone said that we needed to have more dialogue like this. How do we get the right people here at the right time? Meaning like the John Dennis's of the world, Jerry Callahan of the world, Jimmy Kelly. Just how do we get the right people who don't automatically think the way you do on the panel or the way we do here in the audience in terms of being open-minded and accepting of others?
You go out and you recruit them. That's exactly what we're doing in every neighborhood of Boston for the citywide dialogues. We're using a variety of contacts, and we're asking people not just to recruit their own friendship group, you know, the people who already more or less get it. Not that I believe that everybody who supposedly gets it really gets it. But we're asking people to go to different community organizations and invite people, publicize this to everybody, to people who perhaps wouldn't be so comfortable talking about racial and ethnic diversity. So as to the extent that we can in the citywide dialogues, we're trying to push this out to as many organizations as we can and bring in diversity. Naturally, there'll be some self-selection, and some people will just not come to something like this. We're not going to force people to do it, but we hope that there'll be a ripple effect, and there'll be hundreds of people that will know that their friends are doing this. So the publicity surrounding the citywide dialogues will reach thousands of people ultimately.
Jeff, is there a website as well? Because
Yeah.
this is going to be webcast. We want to make sure people can figure out where they go to find out about the neighborhood dialogues.
I hesitate to tell you. Well, I'll tell you what the website is going to be. www.bostondialogues.org. bostondialogues.org.
Great.
For now, if people would like to register, they can call the Urban League in Boston and register right now.
And the number is?
The number is 617-442-4519. Just ask for Citywide Dialogues.
Great.
Thank you. My name is William Cobham, and my question is for Professor Rutstein. And I heard what Professor Ogletree said to make it short, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. What makes you so hopeful that we can overcome this problem?
In the past 12 years, while involved with the Institutes for the Healing of Racism, I've seen transformation take place in people changing. And the most unusual things happening. For example, I was in Vermilion, South Dakota, the site of the University of South Dakota, to give a series of talks on racism. And I was greeted by the Executive Council of the Institutes for the Healing of Racism. I didn't know that there was an Institute for the Healing of Racism in Vermilion, South Dakota. And I asked them, what are you doing that is different? And they pointed out that the judges in that county were using the Institute for the Healing of Racism to deal with hate crimes. Several months before I arrived, 10 white teenagers desecrated an American Indian holy spot. And the judge sentenced them to 10 weeks to the Institutes for the Healing of Racism. And they had the police monitoring these kids to make sure that they attended the Institute for Healing Racism sessions. And after 10 weeks, these young men became firm believers in the principle of the oneness of humankind. And on their own, they went over to the leadership of the American Indian community in that area and volunteered their services to rebuild that holy spot. And they became promoters of the oneness of humankind among their relatives and friends and even parents. And they joined the Institutes for the Healing of Racism. And when you see this kind of transformation take place, this gives you hope.
Quick 30-second response, Judge Walker, for the next question.
I was going to say, didn't Gandhi say, be the change you want to see? And so all of us, even though we are preaching to the converted, you just continue to be the change. You continue to come to these forums, read your history, go to Amistad, appreciate our legacy of the people that preceded us. Be the change that you want to see. It's going to be influential. It's going to rub off on somebody. It's bound to happen.
Right, next question.
My name is Jewel Cash, Sr., and my question I asked at the conference that Mr. Lewis had last week of METCO parents who said that they had exposed their children to African-American children. My question is, how do we teach our neighbors, all of you in this audience and outside, that we have neglected our children in the partnership of education with the schools? If you only expose them and you take a peek, it is our job to enrich their lives and to not see it as a peak, but perhaps bringing yourself into the advanced placement class of Boston, which this opportunity is, by placing them in learning about us the way we must learn to survive, by learning about you? How do we teach?
Who wants to respond to that one? Yes, Robert Lewis.
I think it's a few things. As I start thinking, and Jill was one of the parents who I thank who showed up last week. At the National Conference for Community and Justice, one of the things that we're continuously doing are bringing the different high schools and the different students that are coming together and also exposing them to our broader community, to the leaders in our community, talking about our rich history, as well as letting them know that they're part of really helping to address some of the issues that are facing our communities. But we also realize, while also talking to the students, it's important for us to get the teachers engaged. And it is a hard one also, to be honest, to get the parents engaged. But if we continue to keep teaching the students and we can get those teachers engaged, then I think there's a vehicle to do that. As Jeff was talking about the race dialogues they're having in Boston, we also have dialogues that we have continuing in the suburban towns around the state as well. And what we're also doing is bringing folks from Boston as well as those folks in the suburbs to come together in these dialogues so they can ensure that they're hearing about both, so the suburban and the urban, as they're talking about the issues.
Next question.
Good evening. I would like to address two quick comments. My first one would be to Mr. Runestein, and I would just like to thank you for so poignantly representing the idea of inferiority and superiority, because I think it's a very difficult concept for people to grapple with in this commonality that we have and this kinship and brotherhood, because as in this generation, as I hear young people, white young people have begun to use a lot of vernaculars that come out of the black community, and they have begun to call one another brothers and sisters. And when I would hear that, I would be very offended by that, but now I can be more accepting of it because it is certainly a true idea. My second comment would be to you, Mr. Walker, because I went to school with a lot of girls like your daughter, and no one can be angry with you with your choice of leaving in the inner city. But I would like to know, because I have known girls like your daughter who are my age now when I was also in high school, why did you, if she's feeling the way that she does and you say you are hurt and so disappointed by it, did she, excuse me if I'm wrong by that, but why did she not stay in the community, be involved with community, family members? Because I know a lot of the girls that I went to school with in some way didn't have a whole lot of interaction with family members who didn't or weren't able to leave the community. And I think maybe had you done that, and it was always how I felt about it, I always thought about the girls that I knew, well, maybe if you dealt with someone like me who couldn't leave the community, maybe you would be able to relate to me better. So that was always my idea with some of the girls who I went to school with, who might be similar to your daughter.
Good point.
Okay. She's actually, that's a good question. I'll have to ponder it. She was tremendously exposed. I mean, I go to church in Roxbury. I'm a deacon in my church and everything. So, the majority of her friends are white. And so it's just, in the classroom situations, what I was trying to reflect is that's where she feels isolated, not in the community. She's very popular and does very well. She has an audience that reflects, she has guests at our house who reflect this in our house. So she's not for one of having a multitude of different friends and socializations. But I was just disappointed that, and I probably didn't communicate it well, I was just disappointed that she felt so isolated in class.
Let me get this next question.
Hi. Please, everyone, don't give up on Boston. I'm from Oklahoma, and I never see interracial couples on the streets. And if I see it here, it's a little bit more progressive. Two, one thing is I hope that we don't just think about conversations on race as a black and white context, because I do not want to leave groups behind. In 2050, Latinos will outnumber the Caucasians in this country, and I do not want a backlash, but we need to include them. So anytime we talk about this, please reference Latinos, the movements that have been going on. And three, I grew up in a white suburb, and I had my own internalized racism, and I had my consciousness raising, and I also became very angry, and I still am to a certain extent. How do I come out of that? I'm just trying so hard. Tell me from your experience where you guys are coming from, how for me not to be angry. I haven't experienced what my parents have experienced, but like your daughter, I felt isolated. I felt like I couldn't connect. I couldn't even talk to my friends about racism. I mean, it's just very hard because I'm not an educator, and I just have this huge burden. How do I not become angry as a young person? And also, nihilism is the issue why there's a lot of, I guess, if you fix that, the young people will come around. Right now, we're more concerned with financial success, the American dream. It's been sold to us. And we see that our parents' generation, it didn't seem to be fixed. And how can we fix it? I mean, we're definitely being caught up into that American dream, financial success, helping myself out. Why should I help another group or my own people out when I'm trying to help myself out? So I give you a lot to work with.
Professor Howe, you had a quick comment, and then I want to go to our Captain Bill Pinckney for some comments.
Okay,
yes.
just quickly, I think from our experience, there is something kind of pernicious about the environment of the majority schools. And I think there has been, at least within our own family and certainly among the children now and many of the students that I have interfaced with, they consciously are seeking out the traditional black colleges. And they say they're just worn out and they want some relief. And one of the interesting things, I was at a conference last weekend on the concept of identity formation. And some of the research coming out of a long longitudinal study in Philadelphia was very instructive. It showed that for your African American students who had a strong group identification, they were better defended to succeed in high school and beyond. And one of the most disconcerting things that I learned was that for the Asian American students, they were the most confused. All right? So the Latinos were in the middle.
Okay. I'm going to call Captain Bill Pinckney up now. Captain Pinckney is, of course, the captain of the Amistad. He has done remarkable things, the fifth person in the history to travel solo around the world. He also is writing a book about also going through the Middle Passage, to not just be on the sea, but be on the sea with the context and with character. And I want him to share with you. He's been here, he's listened to this, he's been with us all week, he's retiring shortly. And we both were a little disappointed. Neither of us planned to be here tonight. We were both supposed to be in my seats in Section 79, Fenway Park. He is a native of Chicago. And so the Red Sox were up 3-2. The sixth game would start at 8:20, and he was going to see Boston take the World Series tonight. He can't be there for that, but he is here to tell you about Amistad. Please welcome Captain Bill Pinckney.
Well, as a third-generation Chicagoan, I say in the words of one of our past leaders, I feel your pain. Tonight's gathering is a very, very exciting thing for me because I don't get a chance to go to many of these organizational benefits of what Amistad's trying to do. Usually I'm on the ship, we're traveling, and I don't get to see them all. I hear about them afterwards. But as you said, this is a wonderful audience. We've traveled all over the country, the Great Lakes, Gulf Coast, East Coast. We've had over 400,000 people cross the decks of that ship. What do we hope they leave with? We hope they leave with a desire to learn more. Not about Amistad alone, but to learn more about each other. For standing in line, they have the opportunity to talk to people they normally would not talk to. And that's what we see Amistad as being, a catalyst. Not the solution, a catalyst to draw people together to question, to talk about, to argue about if need be, but to walk away with a better understanding of who we are as Americans, not hyphenated, Americans, and who we are as individuals, warts and all. But one of the things that is so important, that is, if we do not talk to each other, we'll never know each other. We'll never know ourselves. Because when we talk to someone else, we have to think of who we are inside and who we want to project. How long will this take? I've sailed for 42 years. And one thing that sailing will teach you is patience. We have to understand that it will take as long as it takes, and we must be in the fight to make it happen for as long as it takes. There's no time limit. This situation did not start yesterday. Man's inhumanity to man on every level has been since day one. We have inherent, I do believe, like you do, something, a pathology in us all. It's not going to get over right quick. There is no magic bullet. There is no penicillin, no laser beam that can cut it out of us. We must work it up, bring it out, and stamp it out. But it starts here with you. It starts with all of us. For what we feel and learn and think over in this room, we must take it out and tell it to everyone, whether they agree or disagree, whether they want to listen or not. We must speak out. Because when we speak out with truth, there is light. Evil cannot survive in light. And that's what we must do. And that's what Amistad is trying to do, to turn on a light, not just from the ship, but within all of the people that cross the ship. 20 years? No, I won't be here either. 20 years from now, that ship will be here. We built it that way. 100 years from now, it will be here, and it will be telling the same story. Thank you.
Captain Pinckney, thank you so much. Thank you, your wonderful crew, for being here in this city. The Amistad brought us here tonight to look at history, the present, and the past. That was the vessel that brought us here. We are the vessel that will take us into the future. And we need to start that dialogue and continue that dialogue right now. We don't have a moment to waste, a family to waste, or a life to waste. And it's time for us to continue the conversation among ourselves, within our communities, within our schools, and our churches, at our workplace, and everywhere that we can communicate with people of every race, ethnicity, religion. It's our obligation to do that. This is just the beginning, but it clearly is not the end of a dialogue to change the way we as a people, as a nation, as a world, address, confront, and overcome the challenges of race. Please join me in thanking our panelists and our wonderful audience for their comments tonight. Thank you all, and good night.